The rain hammered against the cracked pavement the night Sarah Whitfield, CEO of a billion-dollar company, stood shivering in a torn coat that wasn't hers, clutching $7 in her pocket, and realized for the first time in her life that no one on that street knew her name, or cared whether she lived or died. What happened in the next 24 hours would break her open, rebuild her, and remind her of something she had forgotten the moment she started signing checks with more zeros than most people would see in a lifetime. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the idea that the smallest act of generosity can change a life forever, hit that like button, drop a comment below, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's begin. Sarah Whitfield had built her company from nothing. 12 years ago, she was a college dropout with a business plan and a stubborn refusal to quit. Now she sat at the head of a boardroom table, overseeing an empire of glass towers and global contracts. But somewhere between the mergers and the magazine covers, she had lost something she couldn't quite name. She had everything money could buy, and yet she often found herself staring out of her penthouse window at 3 in the morning, wondering if any of the people around her, the assistants, the board members, the men who wanted to marry her, actually knew who she was beneath the tailored suits and the confident voice she used in interviews. It started as a joke, almost. During a charity gala, one of her board members made an offhand comment that people like them had no idea what real struggle looked like anymore, that success had made them soft, disconnected from the very communities their company claimed to serve. Sarah laughed along with the rest of the room, but the words followed her home. They sat with her through a sleepless night and into the following week, until she made a decision that stunned her assistant and worried her head of security. She would disappear for one day. No credit cards. No phone. No driver waiting outside. She would dress in old clothes, walk into the city as a stranger, and see what her life would look like if she had nothing at all. She chose a Tuesday. She left her penthouse before sunrise, wearing a thrift store coat she'd bought under a fake name, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and shoes that had seen better years. She carried no identification, only $7 folded into her pocket, enough for a coffee and maybe a subway ride, nothing more. She told herself it was an experiment, a way to reconnect with the roots of empathy that had once fueled her ambition. She did not expect it to feel so frightening. Within an hour of walking the streets, she understood how quickly the world changes its treatment of a person once the illusion of status disappears. Store clerks who might have smiled at her a week earlier, when she wore diamonds and walked with purpose, now looked past her as though she were invisible. A man in a suit bumped her shoulder on the sidewalk and didn't apologize. She had spent years being catered to, and now she understood, in a raw and uncomfortable way, what it felt like to not matter to anyone in a crowd. By mid-afternoon, hunger had settled into her stomach in a way she had never experienced. She had spent her $7 on a sandwich early in the day, not realizing how long the hours would stretch, how disorienting it would be to have nowhere to go and no one expecting her anywhere. She wandered into a small park on the edge of the financial district, the very district where her own company's headquarters rose 40 stories into the sky, and she sat on a bench, cold and hollow, watching pigeons peck at crumbs someone had left behind. It was there that she first saw him. His name, she would later learn, was Daniel Reyes. He was 34 years old, a former warehouse worker who had lost his job 8 months earlier when the company he worked for shut down its local branch. He had a 6-year-old daughter named Mia, and since his wife passed away 2 years prior after a long illness, he had been raising her alone, piecing together odd jobs, deliveries, anything that would keep a roof over their heads. That afternoon, he sat on the opposite end of the same bench, a small paper bag beside him, waiting for Mia to finish at the community center where she attended an after-school program that let families like his stay a little longer before he had to figure out where they would sleep that night, since their apartment had been foreclosed on only weeks before. Sarah noticed the bag first, the way he held it carefully, as though it contained something precious. Inside, there was half of a sandwich, wrapped in foil, and a small apple, the kind of meal that a man plans out to the last bite because he knows there might not be another one coming soon. She hadn't eaten in hours, and though shame flickered through her at the thought of accepting anything from a man who so clearly had less than she pretended to have, hunger has a way of quieting pride. She asked him, hesitantly, if he had anything he could spare, expecting to be turned away, expecting the kind of dismissal she had received all day from strangers who assumed she was asking for a handout because she wanted an easy answer instead of working for one. Daniel didn't hesitate. He unwrapped the foil, tore the sandwich in half again, and offered her a piece along with the apple, telling her that a person should never go hungry if he had something to share, even if what he had wasn't much. Sarah tried to refuse, insisting he needed it more, but he simply shook his head and said that his daughter would be having dinner at the community center that night, a small blessing from the program that fed the kids on Tuesdays, and that he would find something for himself later. He said it so plainly, without a trace of self-pity, that Sarah felt something crack open in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years of donor luncheons and philanthropic press releases. Here was a man with almost nothing, offering half of everything he had to a stranger, while she had spent the last decade signing checks from a distance, never once sitting across from someone whose hunger she could see with her own eyes. They talked for almost 2 hours on that bench. Daniel spoke about his daughter with a warmth that lit up his tired face, about how she loved drawing pictures of houses with big windows and gardens, about how he promised her that one day they would have a home like that again, even though some nights he wasn't sure how he'd keep that promise. He spoke about his wife, about the ache that never fully leaves a person who has loved and lost, about how becoming a single father had taught him more about strength and patience than any job ever had. He never once complained about his circumstances, never asked Sarah for anything beyond the conversation itself, and when she asked him why he was so generous with a stranger when he had so little, he told her that the world had been unkind to him in many ways, but he refused to let it make him unkind in return, because his daughter was watching how he lived, and he wanted her to grow up believing that people could still be good to one another even in hard times. Sarah left the park that evening with the taste of a stranger's sandwich still on her tongue and a weight in her chest she hadn't expected to carry home. She returned to her penthouse changed, unable to sleep, replaying every word Daniel had said. The next morning, she did something she had never done in 12 years of running her company. She personally investigated a single family story, using her resources not for a press release or a tax write-off, but because she could not stop thinking about a little girl who drew pictures of houses with big windows. She found out where Daniel and Mia were staying, a shelter 2 miles from that same park, and she learned that Daniel had once worked in logistics, a skill her company desperately needed as it expanded its distribution centers. She did not reveal who she truly was, not at first. She arranged, through an intermediary, for Daniel to be interviewed for a position at her company, one with real wages, real benefits, and stability he hadn't known in years. When he showed up for the interview, dressed in the only collared shirt he owned, pressed carefully the night before, he never suspected that the woman reviewing his file from behind a glass office was the same stranger he had shared his lunch with on a park bench. It was only when Sarah walked into the small conference room herself, no longer wearing a torn coat but the tailored blazer of her real life, that recognition swept across his face, followed by a stunned silence neither of them broke for a long moment. She told him the truth that day, about the experiment, about the loneliness that had driven her to the streets, and about how his kindness, offered freely to someone he believed had nothing, had reminded her why she started her company in the first place. She offered him not charity, but a genuine position, one he earned through his own experience and character, and she made sure that Mia would have a safe home before the month was out. Daniel wept when he understood, not because of the job or the apartment that would follow, but because someone had finally seen him, truly seen him, during a season of his life when he had felt invisible to the world. In the months that followed, Sarah changed the way her company operated, quietly funding programs for single parents and the newly unemployed, though she never sought credit for it, remembering always that the greatest gift she'd received had come from a man who had almost nothing and gave anyway. She and Daniel remained close, and Mia, in time, drew a picture of a house with big windows that actually existed, a home her father could finally call their own. If this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment telling us what part moved you the most, because stories like this deserve to be shared with the world. And before we go, I want to ask you something special. Comment the word kindness below if you believe, like Daniel did, that even in our hardest moments, we should never stop giving what little we have to others. Sometimes the richest people in the world are not the ones with the most money, but the ones willing to share their last meal with a stranger. And sometimes, that stranger changes everything.